harking back to some distant race memory when a silent wood might spell danger. How lucky I count myself then that this woodland, Coed y Bedw, is right on my doorstep. But I've always felt that I've been missing things, that I needed to find out more, to see beneath the surface, as it were. But to do that, I'd need some guides. Who better than Dr. Mary Gilham, the renowned naturalist and author? Or Cliff Woodhead. He's our local volunteer wildlife warden for Coed y Bedw. He'll be joined by Robert Jones Parry from the Wildlife Trust. He's the conservation manager, responsible for many other reserves in South and West Wales. As to the location of the reserve, well, if crows do indeed fly in straight lines, then it would be some 9 kilometres to the northwest from the centre of Cardiff, and at the start of the hills of the Taff Valley, and the village of Gwaelod y Garth.
Well, here we are in the lee of the Garth Mountain on a beautiful day. Fields extending down into this woodland behind, which is the Coed y Bedw Nature Reserve. 41 acres of mixed deciduous woodland, designated as a SSSI, being part of the westernmost natural beech woods in the Taff Valley.
The reserve occupies the valley between the two major blocks of the Great Garth and the Little Garth, which actually runs along the Millstone Grit. But the Millstone Grit is much softer, has washed away, and here, where in the heart of the reserve, I'm over the stream, it has washed right away, and we are down to this lovely rocky panorama, which I am looking down at now. Rocks are so beautiful. Natural rockeries. We spend a lot of money making them in our gardens, don't we?
Rocks, water and trees. Surely a recipe for a Garden of Eden. And if our main stream is no Tigris or Euphrates, our little Cwm Llwydriew suits us quite nicely, thank you. Oh, give us pleasure in the flowers today, and give us not to think so far away as the uncertain harvest. Keep us here all simply in the springing of the year. So wrote the American poet Robert Frost, and I think I know what he means. There is such pleasure to be had in the sight and scent of nature at the birth of yet another cycle of life, the first act of our annual drama, and the greatest beauty in the smallest and simplest of things. Even in the aroma of ramsons, wild garlic, like in some French kitchen, and never far away the ubiquitous bluebells. There's even what could pass for a mini rainforest with its variety of ferns and insect life, although nothing life-threatening here, of course. For all the new life so clearly visible at ground level, we shouldn't forget things a little lower down.
You have to look very hard into these streams sometimes, or you'll miss things. One of the things so easily missed are the caddisflies, which could look like twigs. They could look like a little row of tiny pebbles. They form a little silky, sticky sack, and then place tiny pebbles or bits of stick, bits of grass, and they live within this, just poke their little noses out and scrape the algae off the rocks and then retreat, and nobody knows they're there. They develop into caddisflies. It's rather like, the early stage is rather like a snail in its shell, but of course a snail doesn't get out of its shell and fly away. But you see them flipping over the water later on in the summer, like the mayflies. Of course, most dragonflies, all these things have their watery infancy and then they fly away in adulthood. It must be all of 40 years since I was here with Piers Langhelt of the National Museum doing some electric fishing. he dropped a cathode in the stream, and then he was walking along with his wandering anode in one hand, his mesh net in the other, and I was trailing behind with a bucket of water to put the catch in. In fact, the only fish in this stream are the brook trout, and they go up to about 9 inches long, but much more likely to be just 3 or 4 inches, skulking under the rocks. They don't come out in the open very much. But he was weighing and measuring, of course, like naturalists do when they get hold of these things, and then he took them back to their natal patch and replaced them. All sorts of things go on in nature reserves. This is a particularly interesting one because it's a corridor, and wildlife corridors are so important instead of having just a patch here and a patch there, and never the twain shall meet. If you're a little fly, it's a long way to meet a mating partner somewhere else. So this is a particularly good area, and long may it remain so.
Now this is one of over 100 nest boxes that have been erected over the years. This box was used by pied flycatchers for a number of years. Sadly, they seem to be in decline at the moment. Till this year, we hadn't seen pied flycatchers breeding in the reserve since 2006. But this year, a pair returned and successfully fledged 4 young out of 6. When I first came here in 1985, one of the first things I found was a green woodpecker hole just at the start of that groove you can see. Since then, over 25 years, this tree has been rotting. It's going right to the top. It's hollow inside. When it will come down, who knows? But it's very, very tall. And it's now being used by tawny owls. Tawny owls breed in there every year.
Coed y Bedw attracts many visitors who come to view or photograph the bird life. But for Cliff, some are not so welcome.
Well, several years ago, I came across a hide being built of timber. Any loose branches around were stacked up against this opening here, and I believe that some shooting was taking place, and it would take me about half an hour to dismantle it all and throw it down the wood. I'd come back several weeks later, find he'd done it again. I used to dismantle it again. This happened a few times and he gave up in the end.
Now here we've got Blechnum, the hard fern. It's the only British fern which has 2 different sorts of fronds. We've got these broad ones, which are the ordinary leafy ones collecting the sunlight, and we've got the fertile ones. These have narrower fronds which go rusty when the spores mature on their back. This is usually in acid woodlands, but there's a lovely lot here. Here we have a rather lovely clump of woodland loosestrife or yellow pimpernel. It goes by both names. A member of the primrose family, and then up here a member of the rose family, the woodavens. Now here we have the common valerian or cat's valerian, misnamed because it isn't at all common. These lovely pinnate leaves, only distantly related to the red valerian that grows all over our towns and cities and walls. Here's some valerian actually in flower, and look, one of them has got a blob of cuckoo spit behind the flower head. This is blown out in bubbles by a little bug that thinks it's making itself invisible, but what is in fact, of course, making itself more visible. Pleasant little path this, but slight drop in elevation, and look at all this water starwort. Now this is the landform of a water plant, and I imagine this path is going to be a shallow stream in winter. Well, well.
It's easy to believe that this has always been in this natural state, but in fact it's part of our industrial heritage. Iron ore was mined here into the 19th century, And in fact, we're walking on what was the original tramway. And over there was where the owner, Morgan Thomas, lived, in the cottage over there, which is now a ruin.
Morgan Thomas, mine owner and poet, opened his colliery here in 1827. His house was once a two-storey residence with stables attached. Apart from ruined buildings and tramways, there are other clues to the area's industrial past. A telltale orange tint in the water indicates hematite or iron ore, which still leaches out from filled-in mine entrances hidden deep amongst the trees. Whatever its colour, water is the lifeblood of Coed y Bedw, and not just in the streams.
There used to be a pond down here where the frogs always spawn. Let's go and see if it's still there. And it is, and there are some lovely yellow irises. This was a especially good place for frogs because when they laid their spawn in some of the smaller puddles and parts of the stream, they just dried up, but usually we got the frogs off from the tadpoles here. That's wonderful. I'm glad it's still here.
For me, these yellow flag iris seem to encapsulate the warmth of the summer sun beating down on this secret little patch of the reserve.
Here we have a shiny bronze leaf beetle sitting on a rosebay willow herb at the side of a veritable sea of rosebay, which is coming up in a clearing of the forest. It's called fireweed too because it comes up after fire. Looking at this great expanse of trees all around me reminds me of the occasion when we actually finally bought the reserve from the Forestry Commission, and David Attenborough came down to plant a ceremonial tree, and we all stood round and cheered and said, "This is wonderful." But I don't know that anybody knows which tree it was. I'm sure it must have been marked with a plaque on the trunk, but there are so many trees, and aren't we fortunate to have them all?
Mary, you should have asked me. This is the beech tree that Sir David Attenborough planted in 1985. And look how tall it is now, 25 years on.
Although most things seem to be growing well, one of the reserve's assets is causing a concern for Cliff.
Well, we're now in the summer of 2010, and I've never seen a stream like this. Since I've been involved, 1985, 25 years, I've never seen the stream dried up like this, which is not good.
Cliff needn't worry, however. Autumn is on its way. It may mean the death of leaves, but autumn too has its very own beauty, a muted palette of colours, so unlike spring or summer. It's a slow shutting down of systems, a time to build up reserves for the approaching winter months. It's also the time when the woodland provides sustenance in various forms, often tucked away out of sight. Fungi appear overnight, some edible, some not. And if you're not certain, best leave them alone. There's not much left in the larder now, and it's a time for taking stock. Especially for Robert Jones Parry. It's a good time to catch up with Cliff Woodhead and to walk the reserve, taking note of things to be done.
It's great for the Wildlife Trust to meet up on any reserve with our volunteer wardens, because they are the eyes and the ears of the Wildlife Trust on the ground. And without them, we simply wouldn't be able to manage our nature reserves. We can't be here every day or at least every week like Cliff can. And when there are issues, they're brought to our attention straight away.
Yeah. Obviously there used to be another bridge there.
Well, narrow bridges are fine if you've got a small crossing over a ditch or a small stream, but when you've got something in excess of 2 meters wide, really, you do need a much wider bridge, and especially a bridge with the right sort of handrail as well. So, the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales, we manage so many nature reserves, and many of those are woodlands, which, although perfect for wildlife and biodiversity, pose a problem to people potentially when it comes to health and safety. So although a woodland like Coed y Bedw, we've got plenty of deadwood, standing deadwood, excellent habitat for bats and invertebrates, birds. Potentially on a windy day they could cause problem to the public. So we, as a landowner, have a responsibility for visitors when they come to our nature reserves. But what we would say is also to take a little bit of responsibility yourselves, and when you've got a windy day or very gusts and gales, the woodland is not the safest place to be. So visit on nice weather, and you get more from it as well.
Back in the summer when I was here, this was just a trickle. We had such a dry spell, but now it's building again. Now it's looking more normal to what we used to.
Does it flood in
Oh
winter?
yes, it can do. Yes. But not too bad.
I wonder if we've had any records of otters in the woodland.
I'm not aware of them.
It's a wonderful habitat for them, and there's bound to be all sorts of invertebrates in the water that they feed on. So we're looking for the presence of otters on the river and therefore on the reserve. And what I'm looking for specifically are their droppings, which are sprints, and they are roughly thumb-sized, black and full of fish bones, and they're territory markers. So it's in the otter's interest to position a sprint in a prominent area where other otters can smell it.